Coming up on Lawmakers. It's Legislative Day 40, the final day of the session, and we have a special hour-long program to bring you all the latest from under the Gold Dome. From budget deals to keeping hope alive, from tort reform to the governor's vision for education, we've got it all.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers for Wednesday, April 7th. Here are your hosts, Gerald Bryant and Nwandi Lawson.
Good evening, everyone. The House and Senate are still in session at this hour. Many important compromises have yet to be made this evening as the Georgia General Assembly comes to a close.
The budget, tort reform, and the governor's education legislation remain in conference committee, but a decision has been reached and adopted to maintain the Hope Scholarship Program. We'll have more on that in a moment, but our first story, the status of the budget.
Well, there is an agreement on the $16 billion plus FY05 state budget. House budget conferees, 3 Democrats, and Senate budget conferees, 3 Republicans, have been meeting off and on for several days. Late in the day, they hammered out an agreement that gives House members most of the money they want for QBE education funding. The Senate got the money they wanted for Medicaid. Coming up later in the program, we'll have a live interview with Senator Jack Hill, who is Senate Appropriations Chairman, on the status of the budget.
Legislation that changes provisions for the Hope Scholarship could pass the General Assembly by the end of the night. A conference committee compromise was reached earlier today, so the full House and Senate must now pass the changes. The lottery-funded scholarship could face financial trouble in coming years if changes are not made. David Zelski joins us live with the details. David.
Well, thanks, Nwandi. Conference committee members met frequently on Monday and Tuesday, but appeared gridlocked on most of the major issues. This afternoon, however, an agreement was reached, and conferees from both the House and Senate say they are happy with House Bill 1325.
I'm glad that we kind of put our politics aside and work together.
Over the summer, a bipartisan Hope Scholarship Study Commission met to find the most efficient and harmless ways to change the lottery-funded scholarship. These recommendations were placed into bills in both the House and Senate. Lottery numbers and estimates have since changed, but House Bill 1325 became the bill that the conferees could agree to.
We based our study on no growth for the lottery. As it turns out, it has grown 5%. That may not continue, but we have enough safeguards in the bill that will take care of that.
We feel like we've got a good bill that includes the 3.0 standard for what a B is, which is, I think, a good thing for the integrity of Hope.
I think it will eliminate a few students, but our hope is that students will study harder and get a 3.0.
Full-time students will have their GPA checked in the spring, but part-time students will have an extra semester until they are checked.
A 3-semester check for part-time students, so if they lose it in the spring, they can get it back the next semester. We also have our trigger plan that's a mix of the Senate and House positions on the trigger that will give us the savings we need financially to protect Hope down the road.
The first trigger would eliminate half the books and fees, and the second trigger eliminating the rest. But there is an exception.
The books will be eliminated except for people who are eligible for Pell, who are our most needy students.
They also created a Hope Oversight Committee, a select group of legislators who will annually review Hope and its funding.
Somebody's going to continue to watch it, and that's a part of the bill.
The goal is to have the Hope available to people who are excellent scholars.
Now, many of these changes will not go into effect until 2007 and 2008, so the lottery's financial situation could change in the coming years. Much of the reason they want a Hope Oversight Committee to keep a close eye on things. Reporting live, I'm David Zelski for Lawmakers.
David, before you go, the Lieutenant Governor has expressed his own interest in Hope throughout the whole session. He's remarked that has he yet given any indication about how he feels about the conference committee's decision?
Well, Nwandi, he said he is happy about most of the changes except the triggers to remove books and fees from the funding. He says this breaks the state's agreement with the people.
Thanks, David. And of course, we have an interview with the Lieutenant Governor coming up later in the program.
And as we reported at the top of our broadcast, there appears to be a budget agreement on the 05 fiscal year budget. One of the Senate conferees is Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill, and he joins us live for a budget update. Thank you very much, Senator Hill.
Glad to be here.
First of all, how much money are we talking about for education? How much for Medicaid?
Well, we're still, hammering out the final agreement. We have a meeting scheduled at 7:30, and I think that it is an agreement that the House can take great pride in, as well as the Senate. I think it's a good budget for education. It's a good budget for local systems. It's a good budget for the state as a whole in terms of prison beds and relieving some of the backlog in the county jails, and it's just a wide array of improvements that will help, I think, our state move forward.
Let's talk about where the money is going to come from. What adjustments were made in the budget in order to accommodate both education and Medicaid?
Well, the funding is basically was sort of patchwork together out of some excess revenue from gasoline sales that has come about as a result of changing the level where we collect gasoline taxes from the retail to the wholesale level. So we've had a little extra $33 million there, and we pieced together some changes in the structure that basically enabled us to balance. And good policy decisions, but obviously the negotiations were difficult because of the different policy positions.
Now, I understand there may be a delay in raises for teachers and state employees and no additional health benefits that might have been in there. Is that part of where the money that's being freed up?
Well, it's not completed yet, but there were two proposals on the date of the pay increase as well already, and the later date became the position of the House and Senate. The state health insurance program is undergoing some difficult times, and we're constantly reviewing it and basically operating out of reserves right now. So we've got some difficult decisions to make over the long term on our state health insurance program, but we're very, very proud that there's going to be a full 2% increase for all state employees with the additional step increase for veteran teachers to make a total of 5%. So we think it's a good approach in a very lean year for our state, but rewards our state employees for the hard work and the lean times in state government, and yet encourages our teachers to continue to do a great job.
I understand there is a fully funded bond package in this budget, which should make some people happy.
Well, the bond projects that are included are going for jobs, as in the Ports Authority in Savannah, going for highways all around the state. Is going to build additional prison beds. It does include projects that will build additional facilities and capability at our technical schools and colleges. So, this is an investment in the infrastructure of our state.
President Pro Tem Eric Johnson commented earlier today that who's a winner in this budget? He said anyone who's interested in jobs, education, health care, economic development are winners. He said everybody gave and everybody got. Would you agree with that?
I think so, and if the sign of a good compromise is that everyone's unhappy a little bit, that may be the sign. But I think when you back off and look at the larger view, the increase in the number of parole officer slots, the unlock the waiting list, additional slots, there are just numerous points that throughout the budget where the governor's input and the governor's agenda has been perpetuated. We're also giving the Department of Family and Children's Services the funding to begin the computer program that will help them track children a little bit closer and certainly help them be safe. So I think in every direction this budget, particularly given the lean times we're in, I think it's an outstanding budget. I'm proud to work with the House and with our friends over there to help bring this budget to fruition.
Final question, the time crunch now to physically get all the work done, all the numbers adjusted, and all those copies of the budget printed. Are you going to make it in time?
Work is ongoing as we speak, and everything's got to happen by 12 tonight, and there are conference committee positions and votes to be taken, so it's going to be tight, but we're about where we were this time last year, and I think it'll all work out.
Senate Appropriations Chair Jack Hill, thanks for joining us live on Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Gerald. Good to be with you.
Thanks.
And at this hour, negotiations continue on House Bill 1190, a final attempt to craft legislation to address school accountability and student discipline. In the early days of the session, Governor Sonny Perdue outlined his three-pronged Georgia Learns initiative. The General Assembly has approved replacing the Office of School Readiness with Bright from the Start to oversee daycare and pre-K, but the House and Senate have not been able to agree about how to implement school accountability and student delinquency measures.
Disruptive students will get the message that they must respect their teachers and their fellow students. To help get that message across, we'll use one of the things they value the most, their driver's license.
And that has been a sticking point for the education conferees, who have struggled to determine how to define truancy and chronic absenteeism and when to implement exceptions to the driver's license revocation, as in cases of minors who are head of household. The conference committee has also considered whether to use the results of this year's criterion-referenced competency test to retain third graders. Those who want to delay the policy say students have not been properly prepared for the exam.
The experience has been widely different across the state in 159 counties. Maybe those children who had the early intervention and the tutorial sessions who don't pass tests, maybe retention is the method of last resort for them. But for those others who's not been treated in any other way, it's premature to resort to retention. It ought to really be the last resort.
But Senate Republicans argue that it is time to end social promotion.
We're in a posture in the Senate where the notion of social promotion is something that is not favorably considered, and we need, if possible, understanding your concerns, some compromise language that would allow us to consider that.
Realize that our position comes from concern for these children, that we feel like we have not provided all the tools that we said we will provide you. And we're not social promotion either.
Well, conferees have pledged to remain civil, but the negotiations have not always gone smoothly. At this hour, they still have to work out compromises about how much oversight to provide charter schools, student discipline, and third-grade testing, and that group has not met since early this afternoon. Now, while the budget compromise has been through many negotiations in several versions, one of those at the forefront of these talks has been that of Representative Butch Parrish, who now joins us live. Thanks so much for being with us here on Lawmakers. I would like to start by asking you about some of the compromises that occurred. We heard so much about the breakdown between education and Medicaid and where the funding was going to come down. Where was the compromise on those issues?
Well, I think the compromise really was a true compromise. I think both sides gave some. Of course, the House had decided that education was very important to us, and this was a position that we wanted to stick with and try to provide as much funding to education as we could. And the Senate took a little different view of that, but that's what compromise is about.
Do we have a feel at this point as for where the numbers actually lie, how much is going towards education, how much for Medicaid?
Well, we haven't got all those final details worked out just yet, but I think that when we do, we'll have a budget that we can be proud of and that will serve us well in this state.
Well, I know there have been a number of concerns about just how that's going to impact a number of people around the state, including teachers and other state employees. Do you have a sense for exactly how this budget is going to impact those folks?
Well, I think you're just right. You're exactly right in what you're saying there, and this was one of the reasons we were so interested in trying to restore as much as we could that was cut from the QBE, because we felt like this would allow school systems to provide the services to those children, to keep the classes as small as possible, to retain those teachers, not have to lay people off. And if we didn't do this, then we were afraid we'd be forcing a tax increase at the local level.
So now, at this particular juncture, where do you go from here? You obviously, time is running out, and you have a preliminary negotiation or preliminary plan there on the table. Where do you need to go from here?
Well, we need to finalize everything, and we're going to be meeting just a little later this evening, and I hope we'll do just exactly that. And once we finalize that, then the document will be prepared, and then we'll be taking it up in the House and Senate and hopefully pass it and move along.
Now, of course, there had been some discussion as well about the number of bonds that could be funded, and perhaps a little bit of disagreement between the Senate Republicans and House Democrats on that. Did you wind up with a compromise when it comes to the bond funding?
Well, as you know, we're still negotiating, so everything has not been worked out. But I think there was a willingness on both sides to see that we did have some bonds, because we felt like it was important to the economic development of this state and to keep the economy moving and provide jobs. And if you're going to bond, now is a good time to do it, because interest rates are low.
Well, I guess from here until the close of today's session, you all have your work cut out for you. So we're going to let you get back to that. Thanks so much for taking time out to join us, Representative Butch Parrish.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, part of Governor Sonny Perdue's education legislation has now cleared the House and Senate, although Bright from the Start isn't called Bright from the Start anymore.
Senate Bill 456 is the governor's, I would suggest to you, the premier part of the governor's package. It seeks to consolidate the functions of the Office of School Readiness with that of the Office of Regulatory Services at DHR. As you know, DHR regulates and
polices the daycare centers that do not have a pre-K program, while the Office of School Readiness has been looking after and licensing the daycare centers that do offer pre-K. The governor's program seeks to put these two together that will save the citizens of Georgia money and help facilitate a better operation. Our colleagues in the House have decided to amend the bill to change the name from Bright from the Start to Department of Early Care and Learning, which the governor does not have a problem with. And the bill, as it was sent to the House, allowed for an advisory committee. The Office of School Readiness, that has been recognized worldwide as being tops in its class of offering daycare centers, has always had an advisory committee, and we sought to keep it that way. The House has seen fit to add an oversight committee, which the governor welcomes.
The Senate voted to agree with the House substitute to Senate Bill 456. It now goes to Governor Perdue for his signature.
On the final day of the 2004 session, legislators continue to work to come to an agreement on tort reform. Lawmakers Chrissy Thrasher joins us live with the latest on conference committee meetings on House Bill 1028. Chrissy.
In Wandy, the conference committee has yet to come to an agreement on House Bill 1028. The committee continues to review provisions to this legislation.
Trauma network, but an integral part of a trauma network are trauma hospitals that are operating. We've got to provide an environment that allows them to operate.
The conference committee on House Bill 1028 heats up as conferees from the House and Senate attempt to reach a final agreement on the tort reform legislation.
The collection of items that the House has put on the table and what I would say is a comprehensive, truly comprehensive bill that the Senate's put on the table are really very far apart.
House Bill 1028 passed in the House. 3 tort reform provisions dealing with medical malpractice were added to the bill in the Senate, but House Bill 1028 passed the Senate without an amendment to provide a cap of $750,000 on non-economic damages. Now Senate members on the conference committee want to add these caps, saying they are necessary.
How many victims are there when there is no longer a physician in the community? How many victims are there when there's no longer a neurosurgeon to come to the emergency room and care for a specific problem? You don't know those things because they're silent. So our responsibility here as a Senate and as a House is to balance the social needs of our state.
But the House disagrees.
Economic caps didn't pass in the Senate, and Mr. Smith said from the well of the Senate, we need to pass this in order to put this on the conference committee table. That was close to what he said. It might not be precise, and it didn't pass.
Now the conference committee must continue to work until a final agreement is made.
We are working very hard. We gave a proposal, a very lengthy, detailed proposal about 2 hours ago. I anticipate getting another detailed written proposal back very soon, and we'll be continuing to negotiate. I think we'll be successful.
I'm just hopeful that we'll be able to get to an agreement tonight. We've got a little time, so I'm still hopeful.
And if the conference committee cannot reach an agreement on this tort reform legislation, then House Bill 1028 would be dead for the session. But again, the conference committee members say they are hopeful an agreement will be reached. Reporting live, I'm Chrissy Thrasher for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Chrissy. And now we want to take the time to talk a little bit more about what's going on this session. And to join us to do that will be House Minority Whip Jerry Keene joining us live. Thank you so much for being with us, Representative Keene.
Glad to be here.
Well, I couldn't help but notice, but you spent a majority or a large part of your day today in the Education Conference Committee. I'm wondering, do you have any input at this time about how those negotiations are going?
Well, as of right now, obviously there's still not an agreement, and that's an extremely important bill. As you know, a lot of the governor's initiatives are included in that, along with some other things. We're hopeful. The hour is getting late, time is getting short, but we're hopeful that some agreement will be out soon.
What are some of the key sticking points there? I know that they are still negotiating, obviously, around the issue of student discipline as well as some of the school accountability. What are some of the sticking points?
Well, discipline is a huge issue. We know from talking with classroom teachers all over the state that they're very concerned about maintaining control and safety in the classroom, and it's hard to have an effective learning environment if our classrooms are not safe. And the proposal to tie that to driver's license, we think, is a good one. We think that puts some real pressure on particularly our older students in high school to maintain correct behavior. and that's caused some problems there, as long as some of the social promotion issues. But as I said, we're hopeful that before the night is over, we'll have an opportunity to vote on that, along with some other critical issues, candidly, that here we are within just a few hours of midnight and the close of the session, and most of the major issues are still not on the floor.
And from your perspective, what are most of those major issues?
Well, obviously, we were just talking about tort reform. We need meaningful tort reform and not just window dressing. Obviously, the education bill is extremely important as well. And the budget, the thing that really drives the whole process up here. And those things are not out there, and here we are this late in time. There's also the faith-based amendment that passed the Senate, as you know, by more than two-thirds majority, that we think will allow the state to access and have access to vendors that can provide social services, needed social services, to our citizens. And as of right now, that still has not come out of rules.
And I'm wondering just how House Republicans would evaluate how the session has gone thus far. I know that you've had a lot of concerns about the number of engrossments coming out on the House floor this session.
You're correct. We have engrossed more bills in this session by far than in any other session in history. In fact, about 3.5 times more than last year. And so that limits debate. It also limits the opportunity to visit some of the issues we talked about earlier. Candidly, we are disappointed in the pace of the session. We have seen these key issues that we're talking about now sandbagged to the end of the session. Now, we don't know if that's by design or by accident, but candidly, it's not the way to address these critical problems that need debate, and doing it late at night in a short period of time is just not worthy of the issue.
Representative Jerry Keenhouse, Minority Whip, we thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Lawmakers.
Thank you.
All right. Well, in other news, the network of politically active Christians held a press conference today at the Capitol to urge legislators to pass the Faith and Family Services Amendment, the one that Representative Keene just mentioned. Supporters of the bill, Tim Echols and Sadie Fields, discussed the status of the legislation and the need for the amendment.
We believe that if we can get this on the ballot, it will pass overwhelmingly in our state and allow these organizations to do the job that they're really intrinsically motivated to do anyway. So we believe that if we can get it out of the House of Representatives today, that it will pass overwhelmingly here in Georgia.
Well, I think it will open up the avenue for more people on the ground who head up nonprofits to deal with the problems in their communities. It's a great partnership between government and nonprofits. When you're dealing with the people, when you're on the ground and you see the problem and you see the faces of the people that are having the problems, you can address it not only with financial help, but you can also offer encouragement and support. I think it gives a face to the problem, and it gives the people on the ground, who are in a position to address the problems in their communities a far bigger advantage than if it comes from the state.
Senate Resolution 560 has yet to come before the House for a vote, but it is expected to before the end of the night.
Well, it looks like the city of Atlanta is going to be allowed to hold a referendum to impose a sewer tax in the city. A conference committee came to an agreement today on the language of the bill, and it has been agreed upon by both chambers. The bill now goes to Governor Perdue's desk. Jesse Freeman is live with the rest of that story. Jesse.
Well, thanks, Gerald. The city of Atlanta has been campaigning diligently all year for legislation that would allow them to hold a referendum to impose a tax to aid their failing sewer systems. Usually only a county can hold such a referendum, but city officials and lawmakers alike have agreed this is a unique situation. According to House Bill 709, if Fulton County does not hold a referendum, the city of Atlanta may. House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Royal explains some of the main sticking points the conferees discussed.
We had two different issues to start with. The House version was a county-wide levy on the tax, and the Senate version was a city-wide tax. We sort of combined the two issues and provided for the county to call a referendum. If they fail to call the referendum, then the city of Atlanta could call the referendum, and I think that was that led to the successful negotiation of it. We had some concerns that maintenance and operations would be used in the spending of the revenues, but the city of Atlanta presented evidence that the consent order required a lot of maintenance and operations. So in order to accommodate the city of Atlanta, we yielded on that issue, and I think that was the main point.
The plan has been scrutinized as a barometer for city versus county spliced issues, but Royal contends this is a unique situation.
I think we have a very special application of this tax issue that Atlanta is the driving force of the economy for the whole state, and I think everyone wanted to see Atlanta be successful. Also, those of us downstream on the Flint and the Chattahoochee rivers, we want to see them clean up their wastewater. So, you know, we all have benefits from this piece of legislation.
Now, the city's sewer system is so far below federal standards that the city is paying about $1 million a year in penalty to the federal government. This bill will allow them to hold that referendum to have that tax to fix that failing system. Now, in a related issue, many Capitol analysts have speculated that this bill's success in the Senate rested largely on the promise that the House might vote on the incorporation of Sandy Springs. The House has yet to take that vote, but the possibility still exists. Reporting live, I'm Jesse Freeman for Lawmakers.
They've still got 4.5 hours, Jesse. Anything can happen. Thank you. And now joining us live from the Capitol is Senator Minority Leader Michael Meyer von Bremen. Senator, your take on the frantic activity as the session races to sine die. What are the priorities now?
Well, of course, the budget is the big priority, and there, you know, there's talk that we've got an agreement. It's just a matter now. It's such a massive document of printing the document and getting it on everybody's desk. We also will have to waive a rule that requires that the bill lay on the desk for a certain length of time, and that's something that we've done in the past. It's not what you'd like to do to give people time to absorb the legislation, but we've got 5 hours left before we gavel sine die, and if we don't do that, then we're going to have no budget.
What have you been hearing? The figures I've been hearing on the budget is that it's going to be about $200 million for education, which is something the House was fighting for. They wanted, I think, $220 million. The Senate was dug in over Medicaid, and I think they're going to get about $366 million. Is that going to make all the conferees happy and this bill passable?
Well, I think that is going to be a critical element to the passage of the bill. And from what I'm hearing, that's what the conferees have worked out, is they've hammered out that disagreement. This has been the major division over the last 4 or 5 days.
There are a lot of issues still out there at the last moment. We have already reported on the lack of progress in tort reform. I know you're an attorney. I know you're interested in the issue. Is it likely that in the 4.5 hours left we're going to see a compromise on tort reform?
Well, I'm not sure. There's a lot of deadlock right now on both sides, the House and the Senate. Right before we adjourned for dinner for an hour, there was talk that there's movement on the tort reform issue. They've got some 3 proposals that they're apparently taking to the House. The Senate is to be reviewed by the House, and I haven't seen those yet, but apparently it's an effort to get the bill moving again.
As you go back to your district, what will you be able to report to your constituents that the Senate did, that Senate Democrats did, that the legislature accomplished this session?
Well, I think one thing is that at least on my end, we've been able to listen to the Lieutenant Governor and his effort to preserve hope for all students. I think that's going to be a big thing for the college students and for the parents who are putting students into college. You know, that has not passed yet. That is actually a conference committee report that's about to come out, and a lot of efforts have been put forward to try to preserve hope for all students in Georgia, and I'm optimistic that we're going to see that, and that's going to be a good thing to report.
From what you have heard about the conference committee report on hope, is it something that Senate Democrats can wholeheartedly support?
I don't know if wholeheartedly. I think you're going to see some who will support it because one of the big issues that we've had is the elimination of fees and books or Hope scholarships, for the part-time students. And there are a large number of students who are part-time. And I think they've reached a compromise on that. And if so, that's one of the major concerns my colleagues in the Democratic Party have had.
Senator, I know the Senate's going back in session in a few minutes. We'll give you a little time to rest up. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gerald.
Senate Minority Leader Michael Meyer von Bremen.
Thank you.
Well, as we reported earlier, a compromise has been reached about funding the Hope Scholarship. The plan includes incremental decreases to payments for books and fees if lottery revenues decrease. Lieutenant Governor Mark Taylor has argued that the Hope Scholarship is financially strong. In an interview yesterday, he stressed the importance of standardizing academic requirements and protecting part-time students who receive Hope.
If that criteria is used, then part-time students could lose the Hope Scholarship in their first year of college and not be able to regain it until their 3rd year of college. I think that's very unfair, but I do think that it is important to check more frequently. And certainly I've opposed all session long any cuts to books and fees when there's a fully funded Hope Scholarship savings account and when the lottery is scheduled to break another record in sales. So I oppose both the House and Senate version that would call on cuts in the Hope Scholarship, and I hope that by the time the session ends on Wednesday night that we will have a decision that will not cut the benefits of the Hope Scholarship Program, because our kids have earned it and the dollars are still there.
Let's talk a little bit about your legislative agenda. You have for many years championed the issue of child endangerment. Tell me how it feels to have scored a victory on this child endangerment felony law.
Well, we're very excited. Wish it could have come sooner. I think that some of the opposition has not been sincere. It's been political over the years, and that's unfortunate, because tougher penalties, which we now have passed into law, assuming Governor Perdue's signature, would have deterred some of the injuries and deaths that children in Georgia have occurred during the last 3 years that we've been fighting this battle.
Now, you successfully established the DNA database here in this state. This year we've revised that database. Can you tell me a little bit about those changes?
This year we expanded that legislation to say that those on death row should have their DNA tested. Although they won't be leaving death row, they're confined there. They do have unsolved crimes that they were likely responsible for. And closure for the victims is such an important part of what we're trying to do, because without an understanding that someone has been tried and convicted for the crime against me or my family, then I can't really start the healing process.
Where do you stand in terms of your potential run for the governorship of the state?
Going to just stay focused on my job as Lieutenant Governor. We've got another 24 tough hours of this legislative session, and then the preparation for the 05 session. So we'll continue to let 2006 take care of itself.
In other legislative news, the Georgia Network to End Sexual Assault has commended the General Assembly for its work in protecting sexual assault victims this session. The group recognized Senator Faye Smith and Representative Bob Tilley for helping pass bills that would set up a sexual assault network and providing special training for law enforcement officers responding to sexual assault victims.
The key things that have happened with regard to women in our state have to do with Senate Bill 457, which is the SANE legislation, Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. This legislation will put in place across the state regional committees that will address developing and implementing protocols to look at standardizing the care of sexual assault victims.
Sexual assault is one of the most devastating crimes that one can suffer, and it's also one of the most underreported. There's a very heavy sense of shame and all sorts of other things that victims feel that make them not want to report. And one of the last things a victim in that state needs is an officer that's not trained in how to handle the fairly delicate psychology of a victim in that initial stage.
It's very important that we make sure that a victim comes forth, that victim has, through their victim rights, the opportunity to say, this is what happened to me.
Now we continue with our live guest from the Capitol. Senator Dan Lee is Governor Sonny Perdue's floor leader in the state Senate. He joins us live for his perspective on this session. First of all, Senator, we've been hearing a lot of the double S word, special session, the last couple of weeks. Considering that a budget agreement has been reached, is a special session likely or unlikely?
Well, I'm proud of our governor. He's kind of weighed in on this discussion, and I think he's done a good job of coordinating both the House and conferees and the Senate conferees, and I think that he's done a good job of keeping us from going to a special session. I hope that's the case.
Are there potentially issues out there like tort reform and education that might make a special session more likely, or having the Hope Scholarship completed, having the budget done, is that going to be enough to call it quits?
I think so. I mean, I think the governor has said that he has discussed a special session mainly because the budget is so important. But those other items, even though they are important, I think we're going to have a good education bill that we can live with and the people of Georgia can be proud of. And, you know, we have a little time left on the other items.
Let's go back to the budget. As we have been reporting, an agreement apparently has been reached. We're hearing figures about $200 million into education, $366 million to Medicaid. Is this going to be enough for the House and Senate conferees and the House and Senate members to walk away and say we've done our job and we have done a good job for our constituents?
I think so. I mean, a lot of discussion has gone into it, and unlike any other session we've ever had in this state, there's been some open dialogue, open debate. The governor's fostered that, and the people of Georgia have been served by it. We can be proud that all the arguments, all the reasoning has been heard on both sides of this discussion, and I think the Senate's position of taking care of children that are ill, taking care of those who cannot pay for indigent care themselves, has an importance in this state of ours. And education has always been our top priority. As the first year of the governor's term and this year's, it's not any different. We're without a lot of money, but we've increased education funding each year, and I'm proud of that. If this budget comes down the side of protecting our children and providing medical care for our children, I think we can be proud of that.
You've mentioned some of the successes that lawmakers and the governor can claim as a result of what has happened today and in the days prior to this. Are there any disappointments in some of the governor's bills that haven't done as well? For instance, there has been no action on the faith-based initiative.
That is a very important initiative. There are a lot of people in this state that rely on faith-based related organizations that provide them things that the state just simply cannot provide. And the governor has said early on that we've got to do something to protect those that provide the service and to continue to help provide the service to these folks who can't get it themselves. I'm personally disappointed in that. Some of the other great successes, again, I think we're going to have an education bill that our teachers can be happy with, that our parents can be proud of, and I think we can call that a success.
Is there any hope left for the faith-based initiative? Is there anything that can be done or any bill that can be amended at this late hour to get that through?
I'm going to tell you, Gerald, in New Georgia, I'm going to remain optimistic. A lot of folks said that we wouldn't be where we are right now in this session with the budget. Looks like we're going to have a passing budget here in a little bit. I'm going to remain optimistic. I think that it's the right thing to do in Georgia and that most of the people in Georgia are in favor of it. So I'm going to remain optimistic as we get through the waning hours here.
From a political perspective, what are legislators on the Republican side going to be able to go back and tell their constituents, as many of them run in new districts?
Well, I think the first thing we can be proud of, and following the lead of our governor, is that we've carried on the business of the people of Georgia without regard to politics. Some of these issues covering our children are not Democrats, they're not Republicans. People of Georgia believe that. The mainstream people of Georgia understand that. And I think the children that we're trying to help understand that. So I think first thing we can go back and say is that we worked on the people's business, not some political party's business. And I think that is so important. And quite frankly, it's a new thing here in the Capitol, and it's worked very well. If you'll listen around today, you'll hear that this has been one of the most organized last days of any General Assembly that some of the old-timers can remember. And I think that has to do with carrying on the business of the people of Georgia without worrying about who gets credit, where does the blame go. We've been working on the business of Georgia today without regard to partisan politics. That's what it takes.
Senator, we're going to let you get a couple of minutes rest before you go in for the home stretch there for Sine Die. Senator Dan Lee, Governor Perdue's floor leader, thanks for joining us live on Lawmakers. Meanwhile, Governor Perdue's ethics package has yet to reach the House floor this session. The bill passed the Senate by substitute and was subsequently given a due pass by the House Judiciary Committee just last week, but it has not been put on a supplemental rules calendar. When asked about the bill, House Rules Chairman Kelvin Smyre said he would not entertain discussion at a Rules Committee meeting this afternoon, but could add it to a calendar later in the evening. Even if that happens, the bill would have to go through the Conference Committee process.
And, of course, at this hour, many conference committees meeting throughout the Capitol, and, of course, the House and Senate still in session. You see a live picture there as House Speaker Pro Tem DuBose Porter there presiding over the House as they go through a number of bills that are coming out of conference committee, either agreeing or disagreeing with some of those reports. Also taking a look at, as you see there, House Bill 666, whether or not to agree to the Senate amendments to that particular measure. And, of course, throughout the evening, that is how they will be spending a great deal of their time getting back these reports, as well as taking a look at some of the changes that have been made to House bills in the Senate, agreeing or disagreeing with those changes, and then, of course, in many cases, sending them back out into conference committee. So the process just continues to go on as the evening continues, winding down until the midnight hour, and, of course, Sine Die. And legislators just looking to, in many cases, ways to amend some pieces of legislation to include bills that would otherwise be dead at this particular point. That's what's going on in many of the conference committees at this hour, as various legislators are attempting to attach some of those changes to other pieces of legislation that are passing through at this point. You see there a live picture of that vote taking place. And they're on the House floor as members probably a bit weary at this point, but they've got a long way to go yet as they, of course, have a lot more on the calendar. Still, additional items might be added to that House calendar, depending on whether or not House Rules makes that decision. As we mentioned earlier, some of those measures include the ethics legislation, and we'll also be taking a look at how some of the other pieces of Governor Perdue's legislation fare, if they're able to be attached to other pieces of legislation at this hour, or whether they even make it to the House floor at this point. And we're going to continue to follow that, of course, as the evening winds down to sine die.
Senate about to go into session and back into session soon. They took a break just a few moments ago. And I think we have joining us live now Senator Eric Johnson, who is President Pro Tem of the Georgia State Senate. I think we just got you off the phone there, Senator, in order to join us live. Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing great.
We've been talking to leaders on both sides of the aisle, and both in the House and the Senate. Your take on action so far? Let's start with the budget.
Well, we got a late agreement, but I think it's a great budget considering the circumstances we're in. There was a lot of negotiations. Of course, we went all last night without sleeping. But everybody gave a little bit, everybody got a little bit.
You said that earlier, and you also said, who is the winner in this process? You said if you like jobs, if you like health care, economic development, education, then you're a winner. Is that your take on the process?
Particularly when you compare it to the original version of the bill, although education and health care are getting cuts, both sides worked very hard and found more money to put into both health care and education than the original bill, so the cuts are less than they were originally. And of course, we have almost $1 billion bond package that'll be building infrastructure in schools around the state. There's a property tax relief package in the bill, so and a pay raise for state employees and teachers, which they did not get last year.
One of the other big issues that apparently has been resolved today, the Hope Scholarship. Conferees coming to a compromise there. Your take on the Hope Scholarship bill?
Well, I think we had, of course, our goal was to protect hope way out into the future, and I don't know if this is a permanent fix, but we have fixed it for a good number of years. I mean, it was threatening to run out of money in 3 to 4 years, and this puts it out at 10, 12, 15 years, and hopefully forever, but at least for the foreseeable future, hope is solid.
What are some of the other positives that you consider from this session that would be victories for the governor, for the Republicans in the Senate?
Well, I think, of course, the people of Georgia won, and the two biggest events that have happened have been outside the legislature. The first was the redistricting decision in the federal courts that are going to put Georgia's communities back together and empower voters, not the politicians. And the second one was the flag that, of course, was passed on the last day of last year's session. A new design put before the voters, ratified overwhelmingly by the voters, and I think the flag is now behind us. So I think although those weren't directly related to this year's session, I think those were the two biggest events, and again, the people were the victors.
I know you wouldn't presume to speak for the governor, but there has been talk in the last few days about a special session. Now that the budget apparently has been decided upon, that hope has been decided upon, are there any issues left out there that would require a special session?
I don't think any that rise to the level of a special session due to the costs and due to the campaigns that are starting. Obviously, we're disappointed that ethics doesn't seem to be moving. At this point, it does not look hopeful for tort reform. But I believe those are issues that can wait till next year's session.
What about the issue of Sandy Springs? We know the House and Senate agreed on the conference committee report that it would allow Atlantans to vote on whether or not they want to impose a tax to help clean up and rebuild the sewers in the city of Atlanta. We had been hearing that was tied to residents in Sandy Springs being allowed to vote on whether or not they could incorporate, but as far as I know, that hasn't come up in the House. Do you think that's still going to come up in the House and Sandy Springs bill might get passed this year?
I'm hopeful that it will. Of course, we've passed it out of the Senate. That may have to, that being a successful passage of Sandy Springs legislation may require a Republican-controlled House like we do in the Senate to give the people a right to vote to incorporate the city of Sandy Springs.
Quickly, the ban on gay marriage is going to go to the voters as a constitutional question, but faith-based initiative, nothing has happened there. Any chance for that?
Well, the House has a way of bringing bills out of the Rules Committee at any time, so it's still hopeful that that resolution can come. There's a constitutional amendment coming out on the floor. It could be amended to add to it. So, nothing's over until the gavel comes down at midnight.
Senator, thanks for your time. I know you have to go back to the Senate now. Senator Eric Johnson, President Pro Tem of the Georgia Senate, thanks for joining us.
All right, Joe.
And earlier, the Senate decided to disagree to changes made by the House to juvenile justice legislation. The House version of Senate Bill 148 would result in housing some older offenders in juvenile justice facilities. Senator Mary Squires was asked if the bill had a fiscal note indicating how much it would cost to implement.
The fiscal note, there has been some question about the fiscal note. If you'll notice at the end of this legislation that the effective date's been moved to July 2005. The fiscal note indicates that there's going to be a need for building facilities, but most of us were not in agreement with the fiscal note because this is essentially a movement of 100 kids from the Department of Corrections over into the Department of Juvenile Justice, and there are closed facilities already in the Department of Juvenile Justice. The fiscal note it didn't make any sense to me.
Senator Dan Lee, Governor Perdue's floor leader, said there would be a big fiscal impact, $91 million, which was not included in a budget which has not been approved yet.
This amendment that was done over there without debate here in our committees is so far-reaching that it ought to be set aside and we ought to disagree with it just for that reason. What it does is, and this is something that's been going on since we've had a criminal justice system in Georgia, is that we are going to no longer treat 17-year-olds as adults for criminal situations. We're going to start treating them as juveniles. So the fundamental question we're going to have to ask ourselves today is, do you want that $91 million spent correcting the 17-year-old, or do you want to do something more with the children that are younger than that? That's the issue. We've learned in Georgia we can't put everybody in jail, so it's not about that. It's about what do we want to do instead of incarcerating these young people. This is something that ought to be studied, and the senator from the 5th said that the governor's office is discussing this, and they're going to continue to discuss it. The governor, I can tell you firsthand, is concerned with how we treat 17-year-olds. But to change fundamentally the criminal justice system based on the whim of an amendment from the House would be improper, not just because of the $91 million, but because of the impact it would have on the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system.
Well, the Senate did decide to disagree with the House substitute to Senate Bill 148, and that went back to the House. And we are joined at this hour by House Majority Whip Representative Nan Orrock. She's joining us from the Capitol, where I know you are having a very busy day, but we thank you so much for being with us live on Lawmakers. We wanted to talk with you, first of all, just a little bit about, we've obviously been talking a lot about the budget and the impact of that, but I know earlier there was a lot of discussion about how the redistricting case was going to affect this session. What impact has that federal decision had on this session?
Well, the fact that during a very challenging session with a terribly difficult budget, we were, on top of all of that, the maps landed on us, and court appearances and redrawing maps and sorting out a map that the court drew that had 2 and 3 incumbents in each seat. Those are the sorts of things that often a legislature does in a special session alone. So to have handled the maps for the House and the Senate and totally redone them, worked all of that, as well as moving all the other pieces of legislation and working on this gigantic budget, we were pushed to the wall. I would certainly say that. Everybody is glad tonight that we will be adjourning for the final time. It's the 40th day. It's a very trying session.
Well, certainly as you were working through that and all of the other legislative issues, a lot of focus was on that constitutional amendment banning gay marriage. What was the impact of Senate Resolution 595 on this session?
Well, and I appreciate that question, because I really do hope that Georgia voters and Georgia citizens, Georgia taxpayers, understand that that sort of contentious kind of posturing bill where some people want to impose their religious views about a religious ceremony, marriage, and put that through in legislation and change the Constitution. Very, very troubling. And I think we consumed enormous amounts of time in the House to no good end. You know, the very first clause of our Constitution calls on, addresses the leadership of the state that, and the purpose of the Constitution is to ensure to our citizens the fullest extent of equal participation. I can't quote you verbatim, but we, in having that onerous bill brought to the floor, we were there voting on putting discrimination in our Constitution, which is just exactly
certainly a very
the flip
contentious
side of what
issue.
So you can see what side of that issue I'm on, and now, of course, the state will be torn apart with that ongoing
I'm
debate.
sorry to have to cut you off there, Representative Orrick, but I am running out of time here. I do thank you for appearing with us. I know you're having a very busy evening here on Sine Die, and we appreciate you appearing live here on Lawmakers.
We're having a very busy evening. We're hoping to give some relief to unemployed workers here in a little bit with a bill we're trying to do.
All right. Thanks so much. We'll be following that.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, the legislature will adjourn without having drawn new district maps for the House and Senate. Governor Perdue and the Republicans wanted that. Democrats who drew the last maps did not, but as you know, a federal court ordered new maps and ended up drawing them. Several of the new districts include more than one incumbent. In the Senate, President Pro Tem Eric Johnson, a Republican, and longtime Democrat Senator Renee Kemp are now both in the 1st District. The new 4th District pairs Hugh Gillis, the longest-serving state senator, with the GOP's Jack Hill, chair of Appropriations. District 29 now has 2 incumbent Republicans, Seth Harp and Dan Lee, Governor Perdue's floor leader. The new 33rd has Democratic Caucus Chair Steve Thompson and Republican Chuck Clay, but Clay is leaving the Senate to run for Congress. District 41 would pit Democrats Leanne Levitan and Steve Hinson, but Levitan is considering a run for Congress. District 56 contains incumbent Republicans Dan Moody and Tom Price, but Price is definitely seeking a congressional seat. There are lots of incumbent pairings in the House. Republicans Roger Williams and Ronald Foster share District 3. District 7 encompasses Republicans David Ralston and Jack White. The new 17th House District includes Republicans Bill Heath and Howard Maxwell, while the 18th is now home to Republicans Chuck Harper and Mark Butler. Democrat Doug Stoner is in the new 34th District, so is Republican incumbent Rich Golick, a House floor leader for the governor. Democrats Pat Gardner and Doug Tieper are now in District 57, but Tieper is thinking about running for Congress. 3 Democrats share the new 84th District, but since Barbara Mobley is running for a judgeship and George Maddock is running for the state Senate, that leaves Joanne McClellan as the sole Democrat incumbent in the 84th. Democrats Pam Stevenson and Teresa Johnson are in the new 92nd District, but Johnson is running for the CEO of DeKalb County. GOP incumbent Barbara Bunn and Democrat House member Ron Saylor Jr. are both in District 93. Democrats Kurt Thompson II and Hugh Floyd share District 99. In the 146, you'll find Republican Larry O'Neill and Democrat Larry Walker, but Walker is retiring after serving 30 years in the House. Democrats Gerald Green and Hugh Broom are both in District 149. Democrats Edward Stevens and Lester Jackson both live in District 161. The new 165th District is home to both Democrat Al Williams and the House's lone independent, Buddy DeLoach. And finally, Democrat incumbent Bert Oliver and Republican incumbent Terry Bernard are both in the new 166th District. And although it doesn't affect redistricting, we might note that 3 additional senators are leaving to run for Congress. They are Mike Kratz, Robert Lamoot, and Nadine Thomas. In the House, Representative Len Westmoreland is running for Congress. And in Wendy, at this late hour, still several unresolved issues. They still have to vote on the budget. They still have to vote on HOPE and several other issues.
Certainly tort reform still in conference committee, and of course education still trying to work out that House Bill 1190 as well. So we've got a long way to go.
And although there had been several mentions during the week that of a special session, I think we heard from the governor's leaders and Republicans tonight that with HOPE passing, with the budget passing in good order, that there's very little likelihood that there will be a call for a special session.
That's right.
All right, we're looking, I think the House has just decided to take a break, going out for a while, I guess, to get some snacks and come back for the long haul with those issues still unresolved. The reason they can do that is because all of this now, for the most part, is left up to those conference committees we've been talking about for the last hour. 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate are appointed to hash out the differences.
And of course, we understand that the House Rules Chairman was actually in a conference committee himself, so as per whether we're going to get an additional supplemental calendar, we're not really sure at this point. Senate Live now.
There's Lieutenant Governor Mark Taylor, Frank Eldridge just walking out of the picture, the Secretary of the Senate, as they continue to take up what are called special orders, agrees and disagrees with bills that have perhaps been amended by the House. So a lot to do in the next 4 hours.
It will be a very busy 4 hours indeed.
Meanwhile, Representative Lynn Smith today led the House in congratulating one of our own. Georgia Public Broadcasting Executive Director Jim Lyle went before the House in honor of his retirement.
Thank you for the opportunity to come before you this afternoon. It's certainly been a long journey for me, and I know it has been for you, but I'm very pleased and honored to be here today, and thank you for recognizing me on several years of service to the state. I've certainly enjoyed that. It's been an honor and pleasure to work with each of you. Thank you, and best wishes.
And on June 30th of this year, Jim will retire from Georgia Public Broadcasting, ending a career in state government that has spanned more than 34 years. Our best wishes go with you, Jim.
That's right. And coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, we'll have a special legislative wrap-up program here at 7 p.m. We'll let you know what happened with all the big issues tomorrow on a special Lawmakers. That's at 7 p.m. And coming up on Friday, join Gerald Bryant and Susan Hoffman on Georgia Week in Review for an exclusive half-hour interview with Governor Sonny Perdue. That's Friday at 7 and Sunday at 1 p.m. Now stay tuned for a forensic exploration of the Shroud of Turin. That's next on The Secrets of the Dead, coming up here on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
And that is our broadcast for this, the 40th and final day of the Georgia General Assembly. Be sure and tune in tomorrow for our special wrap-up broadcast at 7 p.m. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gerald Bryant.
And I'm Inwandi Lawson for everyone here at Lawmakers. Good night.
Good night.